Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Eli Elizabeth Sheff, one of the handful of global experts on polyamory. She's the foremost expert on children in polyamorous families, specializing in diversity and underserved populations. Thank you,
Thanks
Dr.
for having me. I'm
Yeah,
happy to be here.
excellent. So I would like to just start with, can you give like a simple explanation to the definition of polyamory?
Polyamory is a form of consensual non-monogamy that emphasizes emotional intimacy among multiple partners. So it generally differs from swinging in that it's less couple focused and more emotionally focused, and differs from cheating in that everyone knows what's happening and has consented to what's going on.
Excellent. Do you feel that humans are naturally more polyamorous or monogamous naturally?
That's a good question. I would say that overall, more humans, well, I guess it depends on what you mean by monogamy. If it means coupling with just one person for an entire lifetime, then not that many people are naturally monogamous. If it means wanting to feel special, being when you love someone, wanting them to love you back and wanting them to think of you as special, more special than other people, then that's incredibly common. So is it the way we act or the way we feel? We don't act as a species. We don't act very monogamously.
Yeah.
But as a species, we also tend to really want, if we're putting a lot of emotional investment into someone, that also generally means time and material investment as well. And if we're doing that, then we tend to want that back and want that kind of specialness that comes with it. So I would say that we are, as a species, potentially serially exclusive for a period of time and then want to expand out and check out others until we find someone else we want to be exclusive with. And that's not true for everyone. I think there are some people who are multiplistic by orientation, meaning they will always want multiple partners. It's hardwired as part of who they are. They can't turn it off. They can kind of force themselves to act exclusively for a while, notice their attractions to other people and not act on them. But it comes at a cost for those folks who are wired for multiplicity. At the
Mm.
other end of that, I think there really are people who are wired for exclusivity or who really only want one partner and they can't control that. They can't change that about themselves. I think the vast majority of people fall in the middle
Mm.
where we might want multiple partners ourselves, but it's hard to share our beloveds with others. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of us want our own little harem that we don't have to share. That doesn't work out that well for that many people. It's hard to come up with that. Usually only incredibly wealthy men get that.
Yes. Yes, such as sultans with their hair.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to be able to afford multiple wives and take care of
And
all.
this is right. And the society has to structure it in such a way so those multiple wives are also not allowed to have other partners.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So it's almost as if it's like a sexual orientation.
For some people, multiplicity is absolutely a relational orientation or exclusivity as
Mhm.
well.
So good. Another good question that brings up is how do you know if it's a phase for you if you're, polyamorous for a while, um, especially in our culture where most people are monogamous for practical reasons and, it being the only model that most of us are raised with. If we do explore, um, then how do we know if it's a phase or if it's something that is truly intrinsic?
Good question. First, what do you mean by our culture? Which culture?
I'm speaking of American culture more specifically.
Okay, so contemporary culture in the US.
Yeah.
Um, I would say contemporary culture in the US really encourages FOMO or fear of missing out.
Mhm.
It makes it really hard for us to deeply commit to a single partnership because what if we swiped on someone else? What if there's someone else out there who might be just as good or better? So it's very difficult, I think, to find and maintain exclusivity in contemporary American culture, but a lot of people want it.
Mhm.
So I think the phased thing is more likely to happen with serial monogamy, which is
Mhm.
what the vast majority of people do, where they connect with one person for a while and then they break up, and then they find someone else for a while and then they break up, and then they overlap maybe a little bit with,
Yeah.
between partners without fully breaking up with one before connecting with the next one. Um, I think that is very phase oriented. Whether multiplicity is a phase or not, I think really depends on the person.
Yeah.
I think it works really well for some people when, especially if they're young and experimental and kind of playing the field, they want to figure things out. I think it can work great for them. And then maybe if they find someone they want to be really serious with and blend a life, it's harder to find multiple people who all want the same thing in terms of children and housing and jobs. And it can be hard to find one person that you mesh
Yeah.
that well with around that. So to do that with multiple people at the same time can be much more challenging. People do it. Absolutely. There are very happy polyamorous families with multiple adults all working out the family's jobs, free time, dating thing. They can do it. But a lot more people, I think, are willing to experiment with multiple partners outside of a context of let's all get married and have babies and buy houses and move for each other's jobs
Mhm.
and things. That's very hard with a group. So that's a phase when it can work really well when people are young. I think it can also work really well as a phase when people are older after they've done the child rearing, or if they know they don't want to have children, they wish to remain child free. After they've kind of had a significant relationship, a significant exclusive relationship that maybe either didn't work for them, the exclusivity didn't work, or that phase of being with that partner didn't work. That then experimenting with multiple partners can be really helpful and enriching for
Mhm.
that person. I've also seen elderly people go into a polyamorous phase
Wow.
where, especially among women, where heterosexual women sometimes who've had male partners across their lifetimes who've wanted a lot of maintenance from them, cook for them and do their laundry and manage their medications and make their doctor's appointments and things like that.
Mhm.
Sometimes women in their 80s are like, you know what? I'm tired of that. I want some sex. I want some attention. I want some companionship, but I don't want another child. I don't want to take you on as a dependent. And so
Yeah.
in those cases, I'm seeing quite a few older women gravitating towards polyamory because that's about as much effort as they want to put into a relationship with a man. They don't want an exclusive relationship because he's too high maintenance for
Yeah.
them. So I would say that sure, multiplicity might be a phase, much like monogamy can also be a phase. I think the
Mhm.
term phase is used to kind of delegitimize
Mhm.
people who don't stay consistent across their whole lives. But the truth is, that's quite rare. Sexuality is a fluid
Yeah.
thing, relationships are fluid, and people change a lot across
Mhm.
their lives. And we don't necessarily accuse people in serial monogamy of, oh, that's a phase. You had your phase with this person and now you're in a new phase with another one.
Mhm.
We also don't say to people, if they've had a monogamous relationship that didn't work for them and then they break up and they look for another monogamous relationship, we don't generally say to them, I can't believe you're trying monogamy again. Isn't it clear that that doesn't work? Like, you're a
Yeah.
lunatic. You tried that once and it blew up in your face and you're going to try it again? What is
Mhm.
wrong with you? But if people try multiplicity and it doesn't work with that partner and they want to continue trying multiple partners, they tend to get a lot of judgment from
Yeah.
others around them.
Yeah, absolutely. Even just speaking about the topic with friends, I've had some very judgmental feedback. And that was one of my motivations for wanting to do a podcast is to kind of educate people and that it can be a valid lifestyle choice.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to stability, I find that as a single mother, I'm like overburdened often. To have partnership would be very conducive to lightening my load, making, having, just somebody to do life with, so to speak. But if I were to, for example, have multiple partners without exclusivity, how could I then also have the stability?
Yes, and some people don't want partners at all. You
Of,
know, for some people there, and I think you're kind of parallel between single parents and people in multiple partner relationships
Mhm.
is apt. That for some single parents, their kids are their priority and dating comes second. You know, and that makes a lot of sense, especially if the kids are small
Mhm.
and live with you. You know, maybe not when the kids are 30 years old, you know, maybe it's time to let them have their own lives. But
Mhm.
when they're 3, kids need a lot of effort and attention and consistency in their lives. So you make the choice as a single parent, it sounds like to me, that you're really choosy about who you allow around your children,
Of course.
which is smart. You don't bring your very first date home. You don't have
No.
them
Mhm.
meet you. You don't even want them knowing where you live in case
Right.
things go
Mhm.
sideways.
Yeah. Mhm.
People in multiple partner relationships use that same discretion and care and are very selective about introducing partners to their children. And I shouldn't say all people in multiple partner relationships. Some of them have bad judgment. Some of them make bad choices. You know,
Mhm.
some single parents prioritize dating over their children, and that's messed
Mhm.
up,
Yeah.
you know. But wise and consistent parents prioritize their children over dating.
Mhm.
And that's true whether they are already partnered or not. Another thing that I really admire about polyamorous families and think that um, divorced and blended families could really benefit from learning this is a lot of polyamorous families will have the adults. If you want to get close to the children, you have to commit to an independent relationship with that child that does not matter whether you are having sex with that child's parent or not. If you
Mhm.
are close to that kid, if you are committed to that kid, then sexual access to the parent is not a mediating
Mhm.
factor. It doesn't matter whether you're still having sex with their mom or not, whether you support the child or not. That's easier said than done. And I think in polyamorous families, that's actually where I saw the importance of what I call polyaffectivity, which is polyamory is the loving and sexual aspect of multiple partners. Polyaffectivity is the non-sexual emotional relationships among people who know each other through a shared partner, but they're not romantic partners with each other.
Mhm.
And it turns out that it's those polyaffective partners
Mhm.
who make or break the stability of the polyamorous family. And I think it's easier to understand if it's a little more specific.
Mhm.
So let's say there's a person and they've got a spouse and a sweetie. And if spouse and sweetie get along really well, then if either one of them is having an issue with the person they're dating, the other one can support that relationship and say, I know how you feel. Sometimes they drive me crazy too. And when they're doing that, I tend to do this. Or, like offer each other support, almost like siblings
Mhm.
who are commiserating over how irritating their parents can be or something.
Yeah.
It's when spouse and sweetie don't like each other. And when
Mhm.
they're saying, oh, I can't believe you put up with that person. I can't believe you're dating that person. That person sucks. Why don't you? I don't want them around. I don't want them. If you're going to see them, you have to go away to see them. That just makes it much harder to sustain the relationship over
Yes.
time. So it's truly the polyaffective relationships that not only make or break the long-term family stability, but even if the romantic relationships dissolve, let's say lover, who's the central person, breaks up with spouse, they get a divorce, and they're still dating sweetie, and spouse wants to see the kids and sweetie and spouse still have a good relationship, or I should say ex-spouse now,
Mhm.
it might be sweetie who manages and handles facilitating spouse to see the kids, ex-spouse,
Mhm.
something like that. More often it goes the other direction, that it's non-romantic spouse facilitating sweetie still
Mhm.
seeing the kids after Lover and Sweetie broke up, and Lover is probably still with Spouse, then Spouse might meet up with ex Sweetie so they
Mhm.
can see the kids.
With us being in nuclear families, I feel like it's just kind of against the anthropological aspect of how we've, grown for tens of thousands of years. Do you think that perhaps some of these alternative lifestyles could be kind of, uh, a collective symptom of needing to or wanting to go back to a tribal kind of community setting?
I think potentially tribalism or clan based families um, certainly work a lot better for the parents' well-being and mental
Mhm.
health. This idea of people breaking off into these tiny chunks and having their tiny little lives and just doing everything themselves
Mhm.
makes it incredibly difficult. We feel very isolated and lonely and overwhelmed as a society, especially parents.
Yeah.
And, that was very true before the pandemic, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, it became abundantly clear just how incredibly difficult that was. And I think people are coming out of that isolationism thinking of a strong desire for community.
Mhm.
For some people, that does take on a romantic tenor of wanting more romantic partners and sex partners.
Mhm.
For other people, that community expresses more around wanting the kind of social aspect, not necessarily wanting multiple lovers, but
Mhm.
certainly wanting a social network they can rely on if they get sick, if their kids get sick, if they feel like they need companionship, if they are lonely. There's what some sociologists are calling an epidemic of loneliness
Oh,
in the
yeah.
United
I
States.
brought a good friend to live with me a couple of years ago to kind of, be a helpmate around the house to just kind of, be a roommate, but more than that. And my ex had a serious problem with it, even though we weren't lovers. And I just found that to be ridiculous. But I think that is kind of the narrative that most people take is the exclusivity and the insecurity.
That's an interesting thing that you connect exclusivity with insecurity, because that is on one level kind of what's wrong with monogamy
Yeah.
right now. Not that monogamy is, or exclusivity. I want to distinguish between monogamy and exclusivity.
Okay.
Monogamy is marriage to one person,
Hmm.
and it has religious overtones,
Yeah.
it has civil overtones of legal marriage.
Hmm.
And certainly not everyone wants monogamy. Even everyone who wants an exclusive relationship doesn't necessarily want monogamy that way. I think as a society, we're really having to rethink what is monogamy
Hmm.
for us. It used to be pretty clear monogamy meant don't have sex with other people.
Hmm.
And it was much easier to tell whether you were having sex or not before social media.
Yeah.
But now, is it monogamous? Let's say if you are sending your ex flower and heart emojis on their birthday?
Hmm.
Is it exclusivity if you are chatting with someone online in a different country? Let's say you never meet in person, you never plan to meet in person, but you have lots of very intimate discussions with each other and maybe send each other nudes, maybe even masturbate together online. You've never touched each other. You're not having sex with
Right.
anyone but yourself. But is it exclusivity or not? Is it monogamy? Having to kind of reconsider and rethink or even think about it all for the first time. What do we mean by monogamy? Is that any different from exclusivity?
Hmm.
It's a new thing in society. I think we used to, within easily the past 100 years, we have thought, oh, if you're serious with someone, you can kind of assume you're monogamous. Like if you've been together for a long time and you're having sex, then you're probably only having sex with each other. Like you don't even necessarily have to discuss it. Now, if you haven't discussed exclusivity with your partner and you are assuming, oh, we've never talked about it, but of course we're exclusive, you might not be right.
Yeah.
You certainly may be right, but you can't assume anymore
Yeah.
that just because you've been together, just because you've had sex,
Hmm.
doesn't mean they won't have sex with other people.
Yeah.
Even if you've been together for 6 months or whatever, doesn't mean they're not seeing other people. You need to talk about that now.
Absolutely.
in a way that you didn't necessarily have to. So, on some level, is it monogamy that's the phase, that's the weird construct that we're trying to slap
Mm,
on to humans? We've had this phase of monogamy because no one really cared that much about exclusivity
mhm.
before we figured out that sperm meets egg means that child came from that person. It took a while to figure that out.
Yeah.
And no one cared before there was stuff to
Hmm.
hand down to your son, basically, like
Yes. Property.
patriarchy
Hmm.
and capitalism and having more than what you need in your own lifetime, having stuff you want to invest in your own biological progeny
Hmm.
are what created this concern around exclusivity, which has really only translated to women's exclusivity. We have never, as a society, most societies have never really expected exclusivity from men or blamed men very much when they haven't been exclusive. We may look down on them a little bit, but we're still willing to give them a break and think of them as decent men. Whereas if a woman acts non exclusively, even in the 2020s, we are eager to shame her, slut shame her, and tell her she's doing exactly what men have been doing this whole time.
That's exactly another question I wanted to bring up was, is it very different for men versus women in polyamory in general? Because I've noticed men are very territorial. Men that I've talked to about it or mentioned it to have said things like, oh, it's fine if you date other women, but I have to be the only man. And
That's
like,
the one penis
yeah,
policy.
yeah.
And that's based in insecurity.
Hmm.
And it's really why usually triads with one man and two women do not work nearly as well as triads with one woman and two men. Because frequently, when there's one man with two women, he wants to control them and not allow them to see other people. They can have sex with each other, that's fine, especially if it's performative for him.
Yeah.
But he's not willing to face his insecurities
Hmm.
because it's hard to share your partners with other people. He expects the women to face their insecurities. He expects them to give him a break to deal with their jealousy, but he's not willing to do so. Those relationships don't last. Generally, in my data, I find that one woman with two men, she is not trying to institute the one vagina policy.
Right.
She's like, I'm full up. Two dudes is about as much as I can handle, and you go ahead and see other people. That's fine.
Yeah.
But the two of you, you're a lot. And
Hmm.
you're maybe just exactly the right amount.
Hmm.
Frequently, she's not looking for a third, fourth, fifth partner.
Right.
And they might be looking for other partners, certainly, and they might have long-term ongoing partners. But that insecurity around the one penis policy,
Mhm.
I do not see mirrored in the one vagina policy. And when a triad of one man with two women works, it's because the women are invested in each other.
Mm, that makes
If
sense.
he needs to be the center of attention all the time, it's not going to work. He's a baby child, a man baby who can't handle his own insecurity, and he needs to grow up
Yeah.
before he attempts non-monogamy because he's going to put women through hell with his jealousies, and it's not going to work long term. Can't manage her independence if he's the only one who wants independence and he can't manage her independence, then what he wants is a harem and
Mhm.
not polyamory, and he should be
Ah,
clear about that. Don't pretend you want polyamory when what you want is a harem.
Yeah.
I would say actually men who are truly wired
Uh,
for polyamory or who are multiplistic at heart
mhm.
are not trying to institute the one penis policy. They're not
Okay.
territorial. They're not freaking out about the women they love connecting with other people, regardless of
Mhm.
their genitalia. It takes a very specific kind of person to truly embrace your partner having full relationships with other people and you not needing to control that.
Yeah, so that could actually be a good indicator of whether or not you are truly a multiplistic person or if you are going through a phase, so to speak. Yeah.
Absolutely. If the draw to polyamory or any kind of non-monogamies for you is so that you can have multiple partners, but you feel really uncomfortable about your partner having multiple partners, stop right there.
Yeah.
Figure that out first. You know, what you're not looking for the way most people are comfortable doing consensual non-monogamy. You're looking for, at least in the US, where polyamory happens in the world geographically and
Mhm.
culturally is where women have control over their own fertility, meaning they can choose if and when the woman wants to have a child,
Yeah.
or anyone with a uterus. You don't have to be a woman. Um, it's also when I'm just going to say women because even though we know that there are more than just men and women globally, it's easier to think about the economics of this
Hmm.
in kind of a binary system. So, where women have control over their own fertility, they have access to education,
Hmm.
meaning they can get jobs and support themselves. They have financial independence, which
Hmm.
means they're not dependent on a man for their living.
Right.
And finally, they can choose their own partners. They're not in arranged marriages that men are arranging for them.
Hmm.
When women don't control their fertility, don't control their education, don't control their own money, don't control their own partner choice, what we see is polygyny, one
Mm.
husband with multiple wives. That's the form of consensual non monogamy we see, where women do have control over their own lives. We're much more likely to see polyamory. So we see that in North America,
Hmm.
Europe, especially Western Europe, and Australia are the three global centers of polyamorous thought. Not that it doesn't happen anywhere else, but those are the places that have the most cultural discussion around it. That's where the books are coming from, and that's where the people talking about it are coming from. And ironically, we see in that setting, historically, if you've looked at the polyamorous community since about the 1970s, lots of women in the lead,
Hmm.
predominantly female leadership. It's diversifying now, and men are starting to take a more leadership role. But before that, 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, it's been a female dominated setting. And I see that among, I would say, people under 60, that the women tend to have more choice, especially if the men are heterosexual. um the women are often more fluid in their sexuality, not that they're all bisexual, but a
Hmm.
lot of them are bisexual or pansexual.
Hmm.
Especially among younger people, there's a lot more non-binary and transgender folks also interested in polyamory. But that starts to, I think, switch as once you hit a tipping point to where men tend to have shorter lifespans than women. So the older you get, once you're in your 80s, for instance, there's more women than there are men. So the polyamorous men in their 80s who want women suddenly have the whole range
Uh,
ahead of them.
yeah.
And some of the women who never would have considered multiple partner relationships earlier in their lives are not only considering, but actively really enjoying multiple partner relationships later in their lives. Either they only have one man because all they want is a little bit of man and they don't want him full time, or they have multiple men. They've got Saturday, Tuesday, and Thursday, different dudes.
What have you seen as far as stability especially when getting older? Because obviously, as we age, we typically need partnership or community. Living alone can actually be even dangerous as you get into your elderly years.
I've seen really some amazing, consistent stability in these families. I wouldn't say every single one. They
Okay.
vary much like monogamous families
Or
vary. When you ask, how is stability in a monogamous family? The answer to that is it depends on the monogamous family
yeah.
hugely. And it's the same for polyamorous families. Some of them have a lot of turnover. And in
Hmm.
those cases, the parents tend to insulate their children from the partners, like not even introduce partners until they've been around for years
Hmm.
and they're certain about that person.
Right.
Um, Sometimes it is easier without children to have that degree of fluidity because kids need stability and they
Right.
need consistency in a way that adults can just manage themselves without that. But especially small children really need stable, consistent, loving caretakers. Um, what they don't need is those caretakers to have sex with each other. Those kids don't care
Right.
whether the adults are having sex with each other or not. Small children don't even understand what that is. And
Hmm.
children, as they get older, really don't want to know about the sex among the adults. They're like, that's
Yeah.
gross. Old people are gross. Keep that to yourselves.
Yeah.
What the kids want is people who can all sit around and play games together and come to their soccer games together and have a happy dinner
Hmm.
together. So for the adults to act like adults, even if they're not having sex with each other, treat each other decently, like kind and humane people, that's regardless of monogamy, non-monogamy, heterosexuality,
Right.
pansexuality, whatever. The kids don't care about the sexual connection.
Right.
So I've seen the most successful families de-emphasize the sexuality. The parents may be very sexual people and may be having lots and lots of sex with all sorts of different people, but within the family, they're de-emphasizing
Hmm.
sexuality as the core of the relationship and rather emphasizing commitment to each other, trustworthiness, honesty, compassion, and empathy, treating each other ethically. That's where the stability of a polyamorous family comes from. And they don't necessarily break up when and if the sex stops between people who used to be having sex aren't having sex with each other anymore. Now they're having sex with different people. In monogamy, if that's the case, then that family pretty much has to break up
Mm.
and repartner with other people. In a non-monogamous family, just because you're not having sex anymore doesn't mean you have to break up. You can stay co-parenting, you can stay even living together or not, depending, but you can still be a family providing love and care and consistency
Mhm.
and empathy and stability for those children, regardless of the sexuality of the adults. Again, irrelevant for the children.
Right.
Another place I see a lot of stability is in aging, that when people have been together. So, for instance, I'm thinking of a specific triad. It's a woman with her two male partners, and
Mhm.
she's in her 80s now. And so her and one of her partners have been together since they were in their teens.
Mhm.
So we're talking 65 years at least together. Then her and her other partner got together when she was in her 30s. So 45 years for them. Um, and when she got sick, she got cancer, and her dudes totally pulled together. One of them would be at home, making sure the house was clean, making sure it was stocked with food she could tolerate, while the other took her to chemotherapy. Then they would trade off. Then later, when one of her partner's parents died, all three of them went to his parents' house, what was, the left. His parents had lived there for like 70 years or something. So when you live someplace for a long time, you build up a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
So to go through a house, your parents' house, where they lived there for a long time, it's getting rid of a lot of stuff, donating it, keeping some of it, but it's a lot of work to
Yeah.
go through that. So to have the partners come and pull together around things like who needs chemotherapy, who needs help with the death of their parent, who needs help picking up the kids, who needs help, who got laid off and can't pay the rent for 3 months and needs help getting tided over until they find a new job. That's where I see a lot of stability and consistency in these long-term polyamorous relationships, that the intimate network is less concerned with who's having sex with whom and much more concerned with who needs what and how do we pull together to help each other. So I guess in that way, back to your question around tribalism and community, consensual non-monogamy for those folks, in a way, functions almost on a level that religion used to function
Um,
before religious extremism
mhm.
took over. Not that all religious people are religious extremists now, but especially in the US, we've come to this place where most people are not very religious at all. And the people who are religious tend to be quite religious and believe more extreme things, like the kind of middle ground of religiosity
Mhm.
has been evacuated to either side of either not religion or lots and lots and lots of religion.
Yeah.
And the larger camp, much larger, is in not religion. And while that's for many reasons why people have turned away from religion in a large extent, um, it has also left this gap on one level of this hunger for community, this desire
Mhm.
for connection
Yeah.
outside of work. We do want to be friends with people at work, but you can't count on your coworkers to pay your rent for you if you lose that job,
Right.
you know, whereas you used to be able to count on your parishioners in your congregation. If your partner died, they would bring you food. Like people would help each other. There was
Ah,
more community around a more moderate form of religion, which has really leaked away, and which is one of the things people still get from religion. It's one of the things that draws people
Yeah.
towards that kind of extremely intensive religion is the search for community, the search for connection, the search for belonging. But if people don't want religion, where do we find that? We find that a little bit in our sports teams, connection around sports ball. That also, you can't, just because somebody else loves the Raiders or the Titans or the Cubs or whoever, doesn't mean they will take care of you when you have the flu, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas if they are your metamor or your partner's partner, and you've known them for years and you helped them out when they were sick, they're much more likely to bring you soup and tea and pick up your kids from school and take your dog to the vet because you're too sick to take your dog or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed also friends, you can rely a lot on your friend network, but oftentimes when friends get married, for example, you see very little of them, and suddenly you're at a loss for your network.
Absolutely. And we see this, we're talking about multiple partnership, but we also see this among people who are making commitments outside of other romantic configurations. Um, and queer people taking the lead on this, as we have in so many other ways.
Mhm.
Lots of queer platonic partnerships where people dedicate each other, to living together and supporting each other and helping each other out. And maybe they have outside sexual partners, maybe they don't. Maybe they're asexual and not really looking to build
Yeah.
a life around a sexual partner, or they're aromantic and don't necessarily want the whole marriage to a soulmate. The soulmate thing is not something that works with their cosmology.
Mhm.
That doesn't necessarily mean they don't want connection and community and support and long-term commitment to each other. It just means that doesn't have to be housed within a container that
Mm,
is based on romance and sexuality and exclusivity.
yes. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Very interesting. How did you ever get to become an expert in this topic? I was curious.
When I was in college, I really had not had many relationships at all, but most of my primary relationships had been with women. And I was a little brokenhearted by falling for this woman who was not interested in me, which happens. And this man was interested in me. So I was like, okay, sure, I'll dabble with a dude for a little while, because dudes are kind of disposable. Like, they're
Yeah.
not that hard to find. There's a lot of them, and they're not as complicated as the more emotionally invested
Mhm.
relationships I had with women. Then I fell in love with him, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't see that coming. Really didn't expect that." So, when on our first date, he told me that he never wanted to be monogamous and never wanted to get married. I was like, whatever, you freak. Like, I don't care. You're disposable. So I don't care. That's weird, but whatever.
Mhm.
But then later, I was like, oh shit. Like, you were serious about that. And now I caught the feels. Like, I've got big feels
Mhm.
for you. Oh shit. Um, and so then I started to think about it. Well, was my initial negative reaction to this only because society tells me serious relationships are monogamous? And if you're going to be with someone for life, that's a monogamous married
Mhm.
relationship. And so even though I wasn't looking for Barbie's dream life and Barbie's dream wedding, whatever, I
Mhm.
still had that idea of, oh, a serious relationship means marriage and monogamy, especially if it's to someone who's of a different sex than you are.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to figure out, is this reaction on my part, ooh, I really don't want that? Is that just because society tells me that's not okay? You shouldn't want that. That's not the right way to be. Or because I really don't want that? Well, 30 years it takes me to figure out I really don't want that. I am a monogamous person at heart. Once I'm in love with someone, my heart is exclusive. Like, I cannot develop attraction to other people. But it took a long time to figure that out because in one part it was the way we did it, he and I. He wanted the one penis policy. He was
Yeah.
not honest with me. He was not honest with himself. He
Mm.
said what he wanted was polyamory when what he wanted was polygyny.
Hmm.
And when that was not what ended up happening, he had a tantrum and couldn't stand it. So we didn't last.
Hmm.
And then after I broke up with him, I wasn't sure, what does that mean for me? So I did the single parent thing for a while of just focusing on me and the kids. I did not date. I was not interested in dating for at least 3 years after we broke up. I did not date. Then once I started dating, I was like, huh, looks like maybe this polyamory thing would work for me because as I was dating, I really did not care if my dates saw other people. That was totally fine with
Hmm.
me. They could have sex with me in the morning and then go have sex with someone else in the afternoon. And I literally did not care until I caught the feels again. And then as soon as I was emotionally invested in someone, I I just feel kind of bad the way I ghosted these other people I was dating. I just like disappeared on them because
Hmm.
it was very casual, which is what I wanted. And then I fell in love with my now ex-girlfriend and was not interested in anyone else, and things didn't work out with her and I. But then I met my now ex-wife, and she said to me that she was always in monogamous relationships, but cheated on every single partner she's ever had, that she's never been able to maintain monogamy even when she's in love. And so I'm coming
Wow.
out of this phase of thinking, oh, I don't care who my partners sleep with, not really noticing that this brief time I had with my girlfriend before that, when I did love her too, that I had dropped all my other dates. That didn't stand out to me. So to the woman who eventually became my wife, I was like, well, let's just set it up so you don't have to cheat. Why cheat? Why not just
Yeah.
be open about it? And we just kind of accidentally became a polymono couple where she dated quite a bit and I didn't date at all. And as long as she was meeting my needs,
Right.
that was okay with me. I didn't need her not to have sex with other people. I just needed her to give me enough attention
Hmm.
and enough care that my needs were met. And once I was full up on my relationship stuff, her being with other people, it wasn't fantastic for me. Like, I needed to distance myself a little bit to give her the space to go do that. But it was manageable for me until she met someone that she was really super, super excited about
Mm.
and started taking me for granted, started just blowing me off, didn't show up for our dates, wasn't having sex with me anymore, wasn't all of her free time was for her girlfriend. And I was her wife by then and not for her wife. And, when I said, I'm not liking this, can we do this differently? She basically said no. So
Wow.
I was like, all right, I can't do it. If you can't meet my emotional needs, you're way more invested in your girlfriend than your wife.
Hmm.
I'm not going to be your wife anymore.
Yeah.
And she was really upset. She wanted me to stay. Of course, because I did the cooking and the cleaning and took care of our old dog, who
Mm.
anybody out there who's taking care of an old dog, they're leaky.
Uh,
Our dog needed like medication twice a day and needed, sometimes to be carried around, couldn't walk sometimes. And, I was like the housewife, even though I was working two jobs at the same time, that made it so she could go off and have fun with her girlfriend all the time. And I was like, no, this is not working for me. But she wasn't willing, or
mhm.
she either wasn't willing or wasn't able. For whatever reason, she did not turn and reinvest and meet my needs. So that experience of me trying to be polyamorous, like near the end of our relationship, I was thinking if I could just date other people and get my needs met that way while she's in this super excited phase about this girlfriend, maybe then a couple years from now,
Right.
then maybe we'll be fine.
Hmm.
But I could not develop the interest in other people. I felt almost
Hmm.
like, those things that have multiple plugs in them, a power strip,
Uh-huh.
where you can plug in multiple things.
Yeah.
Like my wife, ex-wife, she's got four plugs.
Hmm.
I've only got the one plug, and I kept
Hmm.
trying to like grow another plug, bud
Yeah.
another plug. I just can't do it. But just like I couldn't bud another plug and suddenly become polyamorous, she could not excise those four
Wow.
plugs and pretend to really only have one. She could have chosen to treat me better
Yeah.
if she had made different choices and showed up for me the way I showed up for her repeatedly over the years. We would still be married. I miss her every day. I'm still
Mm.
in love with her, but I'm not willing to be treated like that. So I
Right.
would rather be alone
Hmm.
than in a polyamorous relationship with her if that's the way she's going to treat me.
Right.
So if I ever get in another serious relationship, I want it to be monogamous. Like I want to try
Hmm.
monogamy. I'm tired of trying to shape myself into being
Mm.
polyamorous. It just doesn't work for me. And I think it works great for some people. I think my
Right.
ex-wife absolutely should be polyamorous.
Wow.
And
That's
I
a great.
think she and I could be together if she had treated me better. Like the polyamory is not what broke us up. It
Mhm.
was her taking me for granted and
Yeah.
not being willing to put the effort into the relationship that she expected from me.
Yeah. You got to meet in the
That's
middle.
what ended it. And that's true of monogamy, polyamory,
Yeah.
whatever.
Wow. That's very insightful. So we just have to discover through our own experiences whether or not we are wired to have multiple plugs or if we only have one. And I think that you definitely know when you become unable to make that connection again once it's established. Very,
I
very.
think some people, their power strip
Hmm.
changes across their lives.
Mm.
Like maybe they've got one at some times and three
Hmm.
at another and two
Huh.
sometimes, or they've got four all the time, but two of them don't get much power. Two
Yeah.
of them are close to the power source and they get fully charged, but the
Yeah.
two on the very end hardly ever are active. I think it's very much not a one size fits all. Monogamy,
Hmm.
polyamory, any other form of
Like life.
relationship,
Yeah. Just like
like
most things.
life.
It's a
And
spectrum.
it's not even one size fits all
Mhm.
across one person's entire lifespan.
Right. It can
I mean,
change.
I think for me, it is like I am a monogamous person when I'm in love. But if I'm
Mhm.
not in love, I can be polysexual.
Right.
And if I am in love, I can be polyaffective, meaning like this woman my wife fell in love with so hard.
Mhm.
I absolutely see what she saw in her. She was fantastic.
Yeah.
Great sense of humor, smart, charismatic, fun. I absolutely see why my wife fell for her, and I could have been a great metamor to her
Mhm.
if my wife had handled things better.
I appreciate everything that you've shared. It's very insightful. Thank you so, so very much. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. All right.
Bye.
Bye.